Well, I want to welcome everybody as you're coming in and finding your seat in the concert hall. I want to welcome all of you to another edition of SIBA's Reader Meet Writer. I'm your host. My name is Wiley Cash. I am the writer in residence at the University of North Carolina, Asheville. I'm also a novelist, and I have a novel coming out in September called When Ghosts Come Home. But for your evening, I am the host for SIBA's Reader Meet Writer. SIBA stands for the Southern Independent Booksellers Alliance. We are also joined by the North Atlantic Independent Booksellers Alliance. And these are organizations that represent and support and sustain literary bookstores throughout the Southeast and across the Eastern Seaboard. And perhaps you found your way here tonight because one of those bookstores invited you. You're a fan of Will's, you read his book, and maybe you saw the listing on the store's website. If you want to buy Will's book, please reward that store by purchasing it from them tonight. Dance with the one that brought you, as we say. Normally, we'd be doing this event in an independent bookstore near you, but because of COVID, we're all stuck at home, so we are doing the best that we can. These events have been incredibly supportive. We've been doing them for a year almost, and the response has been enormous and so gratifying and so life-affirming. So thank you so much for your support. Tonight we have Will Johnson. I know that many of you are fans of his music, and now hopefully you are fans of his fiction. And if you are not, I think you will be soon. We have some great upcoming events. Next week, Tuesday, June 8th, we will be joined by Christina Lauren, the duo that wrote the Soulmate Equation, like mega New York Times bestselling authors. They'll be joining us June 8th at 7 p.m. to discuss the Soulmate Equation. And then on Thursday, a week from tonight, June 10th at 7 p.m., we'll be hosting Natalie Bazile to discuss We Are Each Other's Harvest. You might know her work from Queen Sugar on the O Network. So we're very excited about that. And in the future coming up, we have Chris Offutt in his novel that's just out. And you might know Chris from his work on writing True Blood, Weeds, Treme, all these incredible TV shows. He's also an exceptional novelist and memoirist. And we have Mary Gauthier to come later on this summer. But tonight, we have my friend Will Johnson. I'm very excited about this. It's been a long time coming. I've been a fan of Will's music and just a fan of Will's kindness and Will's heart for a very long time. So it's thrilling that I now get to be a fan of his fiction. Will is a musician and songwriter who has played in the band Centro-matic, South San Gabriel, Marie Lepanto, Overseas, New Multitudes, and Monsters of Folk. He also releases records under his own name and makes paintings centering on the subject of baseball and its history. His work has appeared in American short fiction. He was born in Kennett, Missouri, and currently lives in Austin, Texas. If or When I Call is his first novel, and it is a very, very good one. Will, thank you so much for joining us, man. This is great.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It feels really great to see your face again. It's been a while. And I have to tell you, I didn't tell you earlier when we chatted, but I had a dream that we convened to do this. I had a dream last night that we convened to do this in Shreveport, of all places, under a big shed. And the turnout was, it was in like the 2,000 to 3,000 range. It was really a nice turnout. And I loaded in, and you met me at the door, and you said, "Hey, man, it's great to see you. I've got to go to hair and makeup right now. Did you bring your hair and makeup person?" And I was just flummoxed, of course, and of course I didn't. And you gave me this indignant look of, "I can't believe you wouldn't bring your hair and makeup person. You see what we're dealing with here." And then I shook myself out of the dream just from the anxiety. So thanks for not holding me to the hair and makeup person situation here tonight.
Dude, from somebody who gives himself his own haircuts, I can assure you hair and makeup is not needed tonight. That's amazing, though. I love that. And I love that we were in Shreveport.
Yeah, we were staying in Shreveport. It was great. There's a giant buffet. The backstage spread was massive. It was a really good scene, but I just didn't have a hair and makeup person. And I didn't realize that was part of the deal.
Well, listen, so I want to talk a lot about the book, If or When I Call. Can you tell us a little bit about the book? Give us that like quick, tight pitch
I'll do my best. I've tried this several times and stumbled a little bit, but in short, it is a family story, and it deals with a mother and a father who are dealing with trying to raise their teenage son through the course of a separation and an undiagnosed disorder on the father's side, and deep and dire alcoholism. And they're trying to figure out how to keep everything from just going off the tracks for the most part. The mother, Melinda, has a safety net in her very strong and willing sister, Maureen. And Parker, the father, is pretty adrift for the most part. And he's kind of trying to find his wheels in this small town world where everybody's eyes are on each other. So it explores some of the hardships of small town economy, some socioeconomic subject matter for sure. It's a place that many people wouldn't think of or even pay much notice to, but it happens to be in my home territory of Southeast Missouri, which many of those little towns dotting that region have been hit pretty hard economically, with downtown squares that are dying and with folks leaving for the most part. And so it explores this familial situation, and with that as a backdrop, which is essentially extended Mississippi Delta. Flatness as far as the eye can see. It's not really the part of Missouri that makes the brochures, so to speak. But anyway, it kind of explores their relationships, and chapter by chapter, it goes character to character, which of course is not reinventing the wheel or anything. It was just the way that I felt was the most invigorating and the most inspired to tell this story. So that's how I did it, through each character's eyes, chapter by chapter.
And hearing you say that, I know you're from Kennett originally, and now you live outside Austin, which is, a big town, but not a huge town. And if it weren't for the pandemic, I know you as someone who crisscrosses the road, couch surfing, staying in hotels, just constantly out there, kind of driving through towns like the one in which this novel is set. And, growing up in a place like Kennett, Missouri, and playing some of the shows you've played over your long career, which, God bless you for having a career doing what you love for as long as you've been able to do it. Do you feel like over these years that you've been kind of like a sponge for these lives, or taking these lives on, or understanding these lives, or perceiving these lives of these people?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the road gives me a lot of inspiration, and it gives me a lot to draw from as the years go. And I feel like more now than ever, because it involves way more solo touring now. So the quiet, it can be deafening at times. And with the band touring, it was definitely more hustle and bustle, and the camaraderie was the thing. And that kind of energy is incredible. But the solo touring has definitely given enough space and enough time and enough quiet to truly start taking notes of some of the things, good and bad, that are going on in some of these places that a lot of people might not think of. I enjoy playing the big cities, but I'm always most excited when I find out that there's a small town on the itinerary, somewhere a little bit off the beaten path, or even a way to where I can, say, take the back roads from Reno to Las Vegas, or Las Vegas to Phoenix, and explore the smaller towns and kind of take notes as I go. I'm inspired by music, of course, and film, but I've always professed that I've been just as inspired by books, and I'm inspired by conversation and interaction, and the constant presence of human folly that exists in front of us every day. And so a lot of the time it does involve just sitting at the end of a bar in some small town and pretending to read, but maybe taking a few notes here and there. And I go back home whenever I can and drive those roads. I did it before. I started the third draft of this book, just to make sure I had some of the highways and had some of the locations right in my mind's eye and in my memory. And so I went to, of course, to Kennett, and I went to Malden and Clarkton and on through Cairo and Metropolis, and walked some of those streets again just to do a little bit of backwards research and maybe back up and correct a few small things that maybe I felt like could be better. So yeah, I mean, that's part of the joy of touring, really, is just driving and exploring and seeing some of these places.
And it's so funny that you did that. And before I say what I'm going to say and ask the question of you, I'm going to ask, I want to encourage the folks who are watching us at home. If you have a question for Will, don't hesitate to ask that question. Go down to the Q&A at the bottom of the screen there and type your question into the Q&A, and make sure you mention your name and the name of your home independent bookstore. And I'll ask Will your question. We'll pause and we'll take questions kind of at the end of the show. So while we're talking, if you think of a question, it's not going to interrupt us. Just go down to the bottom of the screen, type your question in, and we'll get to it at the end of the show. But it's so interesting to me, Will, that you went back to Kennett, went back to that area where you grew up, where you were raised, because you were trying to get the atmospheric stuff right, the spiritual stuff right, late in the book, where you want to get the details right. Third draft, you want it to feel like the place that you're writing about. And in the novel, that's what Melinda does. Melinda goes on this kind of errand into her past to not reclaim, but just kind of resituate her soul. Did you feel like you were doing that in writing this book, like resituating your soul in the place you're from?
Yeah, definitely. Our good friend Christian put it this way a few years ago when we were talking, and I thought about what he said as I wrote this book a few times, but he said something along the lines of, we're at an age right now where we can see back down the road pretty clearly still, but we can see up the road pretty clearly too. And right now, like, the vision feels good to where, and again, I'm paraphrasing here, but we kind of agreed on it's a good time to still comment on our past, because so much of it is still fresh enough to where it feels vibrant and quite real and still pretty close. But also we've got enough miles kind of under us to the point where we truly feel like maybe we can comment on it in educated and detailed fashion. Maybe, God forbid, even with a little bit of wisdom. And so I don't think that I would have written this book the same maybe 20 years ago or so, but with the passing of my mother 7 years ago, and with return trips home, and just exploring the things that I do love about my home territory, but also some of the shortcomings of it, and some of the slow death of it, as far as some of the downtowns and some of the cultural pulse goes. I feel like I've had a pretty good look at it over 40 plus years, to where it felt time to write about it. And so it started with a short story 3 years ago, and I essentially just expanded on that because I had to come to terms with the fact that I really enjoyed spending time with the characters so much that I wanted to go ahead and form it into a book. And so bits and pieces are autobiographical. There are a couple of intersections in the book that definitely happened to me as a kid, but the rest is kind of just inspired by a vibe and by an energy that I get from that part of the world, and that I've always gotten from that part of the world.
Well, speaking of the characters, this is such a character-driven novel. It's a very delicately rendered novel that all of the tension, all of the narrative heft of the book springs from the characters, their relationships, who relies on whom, who's going to disappoint the person at the right moment. And I want to talk about them kind of as duos. So I want to ask you about the relationship between our two principal characters, Parker and Melinda. Can you talk about these people maybe as individuals or as a couple that comes together in a very small town way at a local bar,
Yeah.
and then kind of comes apart in much the same fashion in which they met?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the love is fast and furious at the beginning, and Ben showed up not long thereafter. But as time went, I think, and this is just my take on it. I'm always more fascinated to hear a reader's take or a listener's take on what their interpretation of a character or a song might be. But Parker's anxiety and his fits and his alcoholism started to truly devour him and them as a couple. And we're dealing with a couple of people that think about this a little bit, but they don't particularly leave their 100-mile radius all that much. There's a part in the book where she confesses to Leighton, the store owner over in Illinois. She's like, I've only been to Tunica, Mississippi, and Arkansas, and Memphis, and that's about it, And so their lives are very much at home and within each other, for better or for worse. And as things start to unravel, of course, Melinda takes on a series of new jobs and eventually winds up cheating, with the guy from the pizza place. And and of course, everybody knows about it, and everybody already knows about her other interest up in Clarkton, which is Chad. And so it's a magnifying glass of sorts. It's definitely a microscopic unraveling, or it's an unraveling that takes place under a microscope, essentially, in a small town way. And thinking back on that, my upbringing in Kennett, divorce wasn't a common thing, man. So if it went down or when it went down, everybody knew about it, and it was a big deal. It was a really big deal. Whereas in these urban situations that a lot of us live in, or that I've experienced here in Austin for 20 plus years or so, it's just not as, it's more anonymous. It's more lost in the static of life. But in Rutherford, in the book, it's not. It's loud, and when those things come crashing down, everybody hears it.
And speaking of things being loud and things crashing down, can you talk a little bit about Parker and not only his alcoholism and the way that kind of buffers his life and allows him to live it, but also these fits he has, and how that affects kind of his navigating the world. And my next question is, because of these fits, because of the separation, how that causes his son Ben to kind of view that relationship.
I think Ben has to grow up fast in the face of all this, because he realizes that his dad isn't always going to be literally present, or at least mentally present. Parker blacks out during his fits, and while the fits are violent and loud, he wants to solve them. I think in his heart of hearts, Parker is a good person, and he wants to do well. He wants to conquer his demons, and he goes to meetings, and he quits drinking, but then he starts seeking medical advice and goes through a series of doctor visits and tries to get to the bottom of what it is. And he's as confused and troubled by it, I think, as anyone, because he just wants to be a good dad. And I feel like over the course of the book, he starts to knock on that door for sure. But at first he's tempering the fits with just drinking, and it's a vicious cycle that he's caught in. And so therefore I think Ben has to mature pretty quick, especially knowing that mom's up the road. And it's just the two of them on his own. He may wind up having to take care of his dad, for all he knows, for a long-term situation. So Ben was the fulcrum of balance and wisdom and peace for me right out of the gates. And so I took care with everybody's sections, but I especially liked writing Ben's sections because he is so he's just balanced and stable. He gets in a little trouble and goes out with those guys from Clarkton and smoke a little weed and all that stuff, but at the same time, he's kind of the element that Parker and Melinda are orbiting around while they try to figure out just how to be.
I love that you called him the fulcrum, because I think about when novels don't have big plot pivots, and this doesn't. When novels don't have big plot pivots, they have to have that emotional fulcrum that can offer some kind of leverage, some kind of humanity. And Ben, you're right. I hadn't thought about it that clearly, but Ben is absolutely that. And he's going through such a formative period in his life. You mentioned he's hanging out with these guys, he's hanging out with girls a little bit. These guys are smoking weed, and there's a conversation where Parker asks about that. And I think Ben says, like, I might have done it, but it didn't affect me. But he also is getting his driver's license, and he's really kind of becoming an adult while he's watching the adults in his life. Like his mom's dating somebody named Chad, right? And he's kind of watching the adults in his life devolve into kind of this second act of childhood in some ways. And so he, as you said, he is such a wise character. And, you know, were you thinking, and you're such a reader, and I want to talk about that later, but were you thinking about like wise young characters? Were you thinking about experiences you had as a kid where you were like, man, the adults are screwing this up?
Some, yeah, because a couple of them directly happened to me. And I'm not going to name names or anything like that so as to protect. I don't know about the innocent. The innocent may not be the word I want to use, but I don't need to name names. But a couple of those incidents where where Ben's throwing up on the side of the field, he gets caught with the tobacco, and Parker makes him put the whole thing in his mouth. He winds up throwing up all over the place. And then Chad tells him to go out to the yard and throw the ball up in the air and just catch it himself. It's the same thing as playing catch. A couple of those were direct experiences that involved adults when I was a kid. And I just remember walking out into the yard thinking, man, these grownups, like, who can I trust? That seems insane. This just seems dangerous. But at the same time, he wasn't necessarily inspired by one particular literary character. He was mostly inspired by my stepson, Jack, who is now 16. And very fortunately, Jack is not having to deal with a parental setup like Ben does in this story. But he has become a really impressive young man fast. And and in the process of living a life where his mom and his father are not together, and so he spends half his time with his dad and half his time with us. But Jack has always held that with and handled that with such balance and such grace that it's always been really impressive to me. I'm a kid of an early divorce too. My mom and my dad, I have no memory of them together, but I do remember going back and forth a lot and getting used to that life. And so a lot of this is drawn from those experiences. But honestly, Jack inspired a lot of Ben's wisdom and just composure, and composure in the face of a lot of challenges, for sure. A spot where a lot of 15 or 16-year-old kids might have melted down or really, really unraveled. Ben's ability to keep it together was inspired by my stepson.
That's great. That's amazing. I want to encourage y'all, if you have questions, go down to the Q&A at the bottom of your screen and type in your question. If you have questions about this book or Will's music or touring or literary influences, any of that stuff, mention your name and the name of your home bookstore, and I will ask Will your question at the end of the show. Another pairing that I want to ask about is Parker's wife. It's Ben's mom, Melinda. And you mentioned earlier about, moving between two households. Melinda moves in with her sister Maureen into a different household, and sometimes Ben is there. But can you talk about the relationship between Melinda and her sister Maureen?
It's always been strong, and I try to touch on that in the book. There's at least one scene where they're kids, and Maureen really stands up for Melinda, and it's always been sturdy. But I think at this point, Melinda realizes that Maureen's the strongest thing she's got in her life, and that is the place to land for sure. And Maureen starts off a little bit. It seems like she might have motives toward Melinda's new guy, Chad, and her wisdom eventually kicks in, and her her she she doesn't take the selfish route, and she cuts that energy off pretty quick. And I wasn't quite sure how I wanted that to fall as I was writing it, but I thought, I can't do this. These sisters, I'm so attracted to the energy and the strength between these two sisters' relationship. I got to keep them strong throughout. And it gets to the point where I think Maureen would have done anything to help Melinda, and with regard to living situation, money, take my car, get on the road, go see something, go have an adventure. And if it's 3 days or 3 weeks, I don't even care. Just take care of yourself first and foremost. So that I tried to make that bond an undying constant within the whole thing as I went. I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt, but and I'm sure you've experienced this as you've written, but I didn't have necessarily a grand path when I got a third of the way through the book and started exploring the connections between Maureen and Melinda. I just knew that I wanted them to remain strong. So that path moves a little bit and it gets tested a little bit here and there, but in the end, I wanted that to still remain a constant.
Because Maureen, in terms of defending the family, that might not be the right word, but she kind of grows stronger throughout the book. She becomes more outspoken in defending the family, and I love that you mentioned Chad and Maureen, and Chad is Melinda's boyfriend, and he's kind of the stereotypical small town jock. He's kind of a ladies' man. You don't know what he's doing aside from when he's with Melinda. And when Maureen tells Melinda, "Hey, go take my car, get out of town for a couple of days," I remember reading it and thinking, "You're going to invite Chad over, aren't you?" I know what this is about. I know what's going to happen. And it was just such a great representation of what you just said. Maureen kind of finds her humanity in assisting her sister, like in this really miserable time. Another relationship I want to talk about is Parker and Rachel, like how these two met, what Rachel offers Parker that he needs at a particular time in his life, and what her role was for you as the writer.
It started as a rebound thing, really, because Melinda had already, kind of messed around, and Rachel represented something to some means of retaliation in a way, but also I think Rachel represents something kind of otherworldly to Parker, and really together, like just not just in terms of her job or her background, but just her general appearance, everything. I think that Parker almost has it mentally like, man, she may be totally out of my league, but I definitely want to spend time with this person for the sake of just obviously companionship, but someone from another kind of part of the world almost. And so I think that's what Parker sees in her. Going back to the Maureen thing, I think that Maureen wanted to. I wanted to comment just at the end of your last, the last section was. I think Maureen wanted to test herself in the face of possibility, and the face of betrayal, and see what she was made of with Chad. And she pushes herself to that brink, and Chad, of course, acts on it and wants to take things further. And Maureen gets to that brink and says no. She pushes it back. But I think she wanted to kind of see what she was made of, at least in my estimation, not just what hers and Melinda's connection was made of, but what Maureen. I think she wanted to test her strength a little bit on that. And in the end, she stuck with her sister for sure. So anyway, I just wanted to add that to the last section that we talked about. But yeah, I think Rachel represents something kind of otherworldly to Parker, and so it's a curiosity and something. It's a little bit of an unknown adventure, I guess. It's kind of naughty in that it takes place, they meet in parking lots and in cars and on golf courses, and it's uh, it's frayed for sure, and it seems like it might be bad news out of the gates. But at the same time, Parker just needs some support, I think. And selfish or not, he needed someone to provide a voice and an energy in his life that was clearly gone at that point.
Mm-hmm. And it's so interesting to me. These are two people who meet in AA meetings.
Yeah.
And as you said, they do meet in the car. They meet. I think what you published in American Short Fiction was them meeting in the car. And
That's right.
yeah, and you can read just that scene if you want to. But when Parker needs something, he turns to another person. And then when Melinda needs something, she goes on this trip to kind of resituate herself emotionally in her childhood, in this kind of foundational childhood experience that she's had. So this is just a really beautiful, subtle novel that is about a family coming apart and then trying to find its way back, maybe not as an intact family, but just as people who are honest and who care about one another and who have memories.
There's truly they need each other, like it or not. They very much need each other, and I just don't think that they can quite quit each other. Melinda needs to go out in the world and find some goodness through strangers, I think, and that's part of the reason for her trip. Everybody knows everybody in their town, and it's time to go interact with some complete strangers and see if there is goodness elsewhere in the world. And she finds it in certain places, and she also finds some challenges here and there too. But it's a big deal, and it's something that I take for granted, traveling a lot and being able to drive around on tour a lot. But there are a lot of people in this world that don't get to do that, or that choose not to do that often. So to cross the Mississippi or cross the Ohio into another state and start interacting with other folks in various situations can be a big deal. And there's a lot to be taken from that. So I think that's part of Melinda's break, so to speak, and her even, temporary flee is to get out and try to find some other goodness in the world.
And we have some questions lining up, but I also want to say about Melinda getting out and finding that goodness in the world. There are a couple of really beautifully rendered, subtle interactions she has, maybe in a gas station or some interactions with men that have a profound effect on her, that for many of us would be just kind of daily happenstance communications. But for Melinda, she's seeking some kind of meaning in just the smallest kindness, the smallest attention, the smallest amount of newness. Janet asks, Janet's bookshop is Avid, and they've given us a lot of support for this event. So thank you, Avid Bookshop. Janet asks, is there one character from your novel who you miss the most, that you most miss spending time with?
Oh, man. It's hard to say, but probably Melinda. I think Melinda. There's just a constant curiosity and kind of a mystery about her that I was immediately attracted to writing about and writing her character. And she was a big part of the reason that I took it from just being a short story, the American short fiction short story called Renewal. She's probably the biggest reason that I wanted to stretch this out, just because she fascinated me the most. I was real taken with her. There's just a sense of independence and a sense of wildness to her, almost in this feral kind of way at times, that I just wanted to protect. And of course, you can't constantly protect your characters. It's not fair to do that. You have to be able to put them in danger and have to be willing to put them in bad situations. And so eventually I did, but that took time. And I realized that protectiveness of her just made her a favorite to write about. So yeah, I think I miss her the most.
Well, we're getting some questions about your songwriting, and I wonder if you'll play us out with something. And
oh yeah.
if you'll just talk for just a moment while you're getting ready to do that, maybe think about it. This novel is so digestible because it's in these, they're not even short chapters, they're scenes in effect. But what I loved about it, and what I love about your music, your songs, is that you don't bring pressure to bear on your scenes for them to track along a narrative.
Right.
In the book, it's okay if something that happens is just something that happens, because it gives us an impression of the character. And I always think about in your music, it's satisfying that it's just what it is. We're not trying to string together a larger narrative. And maybe an album speaks to a communicated emotion, but individually and in these chapters that make up the novel, you don't put the strictures of narrative and all of the exterior stuff that we try to set on a story or on a scene to come to bear. I don't know. The chapters felt like your music. I don't know what I mean by that, but
no, I think that means a ton. That means a ton to me. You've touched on something that I've been thinking a lot about over the course of writing this book, and I had a conversation with my friend Michael about this a couple months ago. But I had to come to terms with the fact that I was not the fact, but the yearning to be unafraid to write a mood, and not everything needs to be tidied up and presented to the reader in perfect detailed fashion. I think it's okay to leave things at kind of a mood and leave things at a little bit of a mystery, because sometimes I think the mood can be just as important as anything. And with music, I feel the same. I was reading M Train by Patti Smith a couple months ago, and there's a point in the book, and there's not much that I disagree with her on at all. I mean, I freaking adore Patti Smith, but there's a point in there where she, and I'm going to have to paraphrase here, but she mentions when she's reading a book, and if something is left untied, or if a mood kind of ends a chapter and the writer moves on, she is traditionally quite distracted by the unresolved nature, and she'll find herself, wanting to file requests for answers as the book goes, and she'll wind up distracted for a time in the book, if not the remainder of the book. But I don't necessarily feel that way. I think it's okay for a book to be musical in that way. And I was thinking of like Richard Brautigan's and Watermelon Sugar, and like that book to me feels kind of like an ambient record or something. It's just a mood, and it took time to become okay with that, and took time to just get comfortable with every once in a while a chapter just has to kind of be a mood or a vibe or an energy. It doesn't have to be a perfect dialogue necessarily. And so with that, yeah, there are some links to the songs for sure, because the songs can be a little bit obtuse or angular in language, but that's okay with me.
Well, I want to ask one more question before you play. A friend of mine, Justin, LaGrange, Georgia, bookstore, Pretty Good Books. Years ago, when I first met you, I got a piece of your art. It was a baseball scene, and I had you sign it for my friend Justin, who to this day did one of the kindest things anyone has ever helped me do. Justin spent 2 or 3 days helping me build a fence, and down in Louisiana. And even in the moment, I was like, this is the nicest thing anybody's ever done for me. Justin asked, are there any places you've toured or visited that you find especially inspirational? A real quick answer before you play us out.
Oh yeah, definitely. The American West, without a doubt. Just the feeling of anonymity and the feeling of smallness, and how truly minuscule we are as humans. The West will do that to you. It will humble you in patterns of weather or just rough terrain, and I love it out there. And I love the interior of Spain. A lot of the time when I go to Spain and tour, I'll take trains from city to city just to kind of soak up and get drunk on the scenery and on the landscape. And so the West and Spain definitely do it for me. They inspire me for sure.
Well, thank you, Will.
Yeah. All right. You want me to play one?
Yep. I'm gonna black out my screen.
Okay. Won't you call your actions down? Erase for November crown and travel right on out to me. We are new to this velocity. And if anyone could bring it true, my guess is anyone just might be you. What a savage run that we are on, with our patience stretched and you and me gone. It is in the soil on this blessed night, and it stains the sky at evening light, and it lies and waits until the dawn, and its teeth and its smell, they are never gone. So Captain, won't you come to me? We'll charge along inherently until we twist and we come to be new shards of former dignity.
Thank you so much, Will.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us. We are going to be back with you Tuesday, June 8th at 7 p.m. for the Soulmate Equation. Christina Lauren, New York Times bestsellers. It's a big book, so please join us for that. If you enjoyed what you heard tonight, please get Will's book from your favorite independent bookstore. Thank you. We had a lot of people from all over the country. So Will, thanks for joining us from Austin. Big love to you and Jesse and all those babies, man. Be well.
Thank you so much. I'll see you guys around.
All right.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye.